Iron bit into Eliza's wrists, raw skin chafing against the shackles. Dust devils danced across the Dry Creek market, swirling around her humiliation as men sized her up like livestock. $5, the trader sneered, unaware of the land deed hidden beneath the floorboards of her future home. Eliza's heart hammered a silent vow. This degradation would not be her ending. The sun hung low over Dry Creek, casting long shadows across the dust-caked town. The livestock market pulsed with noise, shouts, hoof-beat hats, and the rustle of restless cattle. The air stank of sweat, dung, and desperation. Jackson Cole, a broad-shouldered rancher of 36, led his daughter by the hand. Molly, just 4, skipped beside him in a faded blue dress, her golden curls bouncing with every step. "Daddy, can we see the ponies after?" she chirped. "We will, darling. Just need to check on the hay first." But before they reached the stalls, Molly stopped abruptly. Her hand tightened around his. "What is it?" Jackson asked, crouching. She didn't speak, just pointed. At the far edge of the market, nearly hidden in shadow, a woman was chained to a thick wooden post. Iron shackles bound her wrists and ankles. She was barefoot, her dress filthy and torn, her face bruised and streaked with dried blood. Her dark hair hung like a curtain over her slumped shoulders. "Daddy?" Molly's voice was small. "Is she dying?" Jackson's chest tightened. People passed her without a glance. She wasn't part of the livestock. She wasn't even named. A nearby trader noticed Jackson staring. "She yours?" Jackson asked low. The man shrugged. "Was her brother's? He owed more than he could pay. She's what's left. Barely breathing. Ain't worth much." Jackson looked at the woman. Her chest rose and fell just barely. Why hasn't anyone taken her? Who'd want a half-dead girl with fire in her gut and nothing to sell? Jackson turned, but Molly didn't move. "Daddy, she's hurt," she said, tugging harder. "We got to help her." He looked at his daughter's eyes, clear, pleading, full of a compassion he hadn't seen in years. "Please," she whispered. He hesitated. He didn't have space for this, or reason or time. But he turned back to the girl in chains. Not a burden, not yet gone. "How much?" he asked. The trader blinked. "You serious? How much to unchain her and get her on a horse?" $5. Jackson reached into his coat and counted the coins. The trader pocketed them fast. They unchained her. She crumpled into Jackson's arms like a rag doll, feverish and far too light. Molly stood nearby, hands clenched. "What's her name?" Jackson asked. "I didn't give one." "Didn't ask." Jackson lifted her onto his horse, settling behind her. Molly climbed onto the pony, glancing back often as they rode out. Just a man, a child, and a woman no one wanted. An hour later, the land stretched golden and wide. The woman hadn't stirred. Her body sagged against Jackson's chest, her head tilted unnaturally. "Daddy," Molly called softly. "She's not moving again." Jackson looked down. Her face was pale, lips dry. Molly reached into her pocket and pulled out a frayed handkerchief. She rose in her stirrups and gently wiped the woman's brow, brushing aside the blood and dust. "It's okay now," she whispered. "You're coming home." Jackson turned, watched as his daughter's smooth, tangled hair, with tiny, careful fingers. The woman's body, though broken, leaned into him with quiet trust, and for the first time in years, something cracked open in Jackson's chest. He looked ahead. The reins were firm in his hands, and behind the ache in his ribs, something stirred. Life, not loud, not sure, but still breathing. The room smelled of pine and old dust. Eliza opened her eyes slowly, lids heavy as stone. The low ceiling above her swam into focus. Rough wooden beams, a single glass window cracked in one corner, and thin sunlight seeping in through slats. Her body ached from the inside out. Her wrists burned. The sound of something soft came to her ears. Small feet, careful steps. She turned her head just slightly. Molly stood in the doorway, holding a wooden bowl with two hands. Steam curled from its surface. "I brought you some porridge," the girl said, her voice small but sure. Eliza didn't answer. Her eyes tracked the child like an injured animal, too weak to run, too weary to trust. Molly stepped closer and set the bowl down on the nightstand. "It's not too hot." I waited. Still, Eliza said nothing. She waited until the child was gone before touching the bowl, her fingers trembling. Jackson kept her in the old storage room off the barn. It was cleaner now. He had brought in a cot, a chair, a pitcher of water. It was not much, but it was shelter, and for now that was more than she'd had in months. He watched her from afar. As the days passed, she never spoke unless spoken to, and even then only a few clipped words. But he noticed how she moved, quiet as a whisper. She swept the steps without being asked. She mended Molly's torn dress with hands that knew stitches better than words. She read aloud from an old primer book by the fire, her voice soft as wind. Molly curled at her feet. Miss E. Molly had begun to call her because Eliza's too long. Eliza didn't correct her. Jackson still kept his distance. He made sure she ate, made sure she had what she needed. But he told himself this was obligation, nothing more. Just a man doing what was right. Yet he watched. He watched the way she cooled Molly's soup before handing it over. The way she placed a hand on the girl's head when she fell asleep on the porch swing, shielding her from the breeze. She was still a stranger, but one who moved like someone who had once belonged somewhere. It was early evening when it happened. Jackson was repairing a fence near the back pasture. Molly was chasing butterflies by the creek. Eliza had been gathering herbs not far off. Then came the scream, "May Daddy!" Jackson dropped his hammer and ran. He saw it before he reached her. A rattlesnake coiled and striking, but Eliza was faster. She hurled herself between the snake and the child, grabbing it mid-strike with her bare hand. It sank its fangs into her forearm. She didn't cry out, only gritted her teeth as she flung the snake into the brush. Jackson lifted Molly into one arm and pulled Elisa into the other. Anderson was off on his hunt at the ancient sign pointing the way, and Jackson pounded. He worked all night. The wound was ugly and swelling fast. Jackson crushed herbs, mixed puces, and bound her arm tightly. He laid cool cloths over her head and whispered things he didn't know he still remembered. Prayers, songs, old comforts. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness. At some point near dawn, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, wild and feverish. "Please," she murmured, voice cracked. "Please don't chain me again." Jackson froze. He had heard her voice before, but not like this. He reached for her hand, cold and damp with sweat. "No one's chaining you," he said quietly. "Not ever again." She didn't answer. Her eyes slipped closed once more. But Jackson didn't leave. He sat beside her through the breaking light, and when Molly came in with her morning blanket, she found her father still there, holding the hand of the woman who had no reason left to trust, but had saved her all the same. By the time the swelling in Eliza's arm faded and the color returned to her cheeks, the air had turned cooler. The days shortened. Autumn painted the desert hills with golden red. Life on the ranch moved forward, but Eliza stood still, packing the few items she had. "I can't stay," she said simply. Jackson leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You don't owe us anything." He reached into his coat pocket and held out a small cloth pouch. Inside was a handful of coins, enough to get her as far as Santa Fe if she traveled light. She took it wordlessly, fingers trembling. Molly, who had overheard, burst into tears. "You can't go," she cried, rushing to Eliza, clutching her skirt. "You saved me. You live here now." Eliza knelt, smoothing the child's hair. "You're safe now, little one. That's what matters." Molly sobbed harder, burying her face in Eliza's shoulder. Jackson watched, jaw clenched. Then finally he spoke. "You could stay on as help. I mean, paid work. Molly clearly likes you, and the place could use another hand." Eliza hesitated. Then with a soft nod, she said, "I'll earn my keep." At first, the townsfolk stared. Dry Creek was small. Whispers traveled fast. Jackson Cole, the quiet widower hour, was seen riding with a dark-haired woman who once hung in chains at the market. They called her names behind her back, some cruel, some worse. "Charity case," someone muttered at the general store. "She was bought, just not for work," another sneered. One older woman whispered loud enough for Eliza to hear. "That's the, yeah, he's keeping in the barn." Eliza didn't flinch. She stood tall, met their eyes, and carried on. At the ranch, her hands worked without rest. She woke before dawn to gather eggs, fed the horses, swept the porch. She repaired the broken hinges on the stable doors. She fixed the loose boards on the fence. By the third week, the place looked more alive than it had since Jackson's wife passed, and Molly followed her everywhere. "Miss E, can I help?" she'd ask, trailing behind with a basket. One morning, as Eliza showed her how to plant winter herbs in the side garden, Molly looked up and said, "I think you're my new mama now." Eliza froze. Her fingers sunk in the soil. Jackson heard it too. He had just stepped outside with his coffee. He didn't say anything, just stood there looking at them. Then he turned and walked back into the house. Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, blinking against a sudden sting in her eyes. "Let's finish planting," she whispered. A few days later, Jackson asked Eliza to accompany him and Molly to the schoolhouse to register the child for winter term. They arrived just as the sun broke through the clouds. The teacher handed over a form and asked for Molly's details: age, address, guardian. Jackson was busy talking to the teacher about the school hours. Eliza, seated nearby, picked up the pen and filled in the lines. Molly Cole, 4 years old. Eliza Cole. She paused when she wrote it. Her hand trembled slightly, but she did not cross it out. That evening, Jackson returned from town with a small wooden box wrapped in cloth. He found Eliza folding laundry in the back room. "This came for you," he said, setting it down. She eyed him wearily, then unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a pale blue dress, simple but new. Beneath it lay a small engraved tag on a leather strap. It read, "Miss Eliza Cole." She stared at it, unable to speak. Jackson cleared his throat. "Molly picked the color," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Said it looked like sky right before the stars come out." Eliza's throat tightened. She closed the box gently, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she whispered, "Thank you." Jackson gave a small nod, turned, and walked out. But that night, as the fire crackled low, Eliza stood in front of the mirror in the storage room. The pale blue dress soft beneath her fingers, and for the first time in a long time, the reflection staring back at her looked like someone who had a name. The morning fog rolled low across the valley, veiling the ranch in silver mist. Dew clung to the wooden fences and to the porch railings where Eliza stood, arms folded tight against the chill. She had risen before the others, restless, her thoughts uneasy. Something in the stillness of that morning pulled her to the old storage shed, once her sick bed, now used for tools and memories neither of them dared confront. As she swept the far corner, her broom caught against a warped floorboard. Curious, she knelt and pried it loose. Beneath, wrapped in layers of brittle cloth, lay a bundle, dust-covered, smelling of time and loss. Eliza opened it with cautious fingers. Inside were faded letters, a land deed, and an old hand-drawn map etched in ink now barely legible. The paper crackled as she unfolded it. The seal read, "Crane Homestead, 1861. She froze. And then, like floodwaters breaking through, the memories came. She was just a girl when the raiders came. Guns blazing, fire licking the walls of their cabin. Her mother's scream still echoed in her bones. Her father had died the winter before. Her older brother, Simon, had dragged her into the hills to hide. When they returned, the house was ash. Her mother was gone, the land stolen. They never spoke of it again until now. Later that day, Eliza stood behind the barn with a spade in her hands. The sun had burned through the fog, and the earth was dry, cracked from years of neglect. She dug slowly, methodically, near the spot where her father once buried a cedar box. His legacy, he called it. Molly skipped over, cheeks flushed. "Can I help?" Eliza nodded silently, passing her the smaller trowel. Together they worked. The ground gave way to splinters of old wood. Eliza brushed away the dirt, fingers trembling. She pried open the lid. Inside, a silver necklace, tarnished but intact. A photograph ripped at the edge of a woman and 2 children, herself, Simon, and their mother. The silver tag on the necklace read, "Eliza Jean C. Jackson, found them crouched in the dirt, hands soiled, eyes rimmed red, but in God's name." He froze when he saw the open box. "What are you doing?" His voice was sharper than he meant. Eliza stood slowly. "This land, it used to be ours. This was my father's, my family's." Jackson's jaw tightened. "You were digging behind my barn without a word? What was I supposed to think? That I was stealing?" Her voice broke. "Running again?" His silence was answer enough. She looked away, her fists clenched. You still don't trust me. He stepped forward, trying to calm Eliza. No, she said, tears hot in her eyes. You think I was born with chains. But I wasn't. My father was a homesteader. My mother sang in church. I wasn't always this. Jackson softened. Then why didn't you say any of it? Because it didn't matter, she whispered. Not when I was bleeding in the street. Not when I was sold like cattle. No one wanted the story. They just wanted to shut it up. Molly looked between them, clutching the photo in her hands. Eliza sank to the ground, shoulders shaking. Simon was the only one I had left. But he sold me to pay off his gambling. Told me I was better off in chains than dead. Maybe he was right. Jackson knelt beside her. He picked up the necklace, rubbed the tarnished metal with his thumb. He was wrong. She looked up at him, breath shallow. He'd fastened the chain around her neck, the pendant resting just above her heart. You're not what happened to you, he said, voice low but steady. You're who you choose to be right here with us. Eliza closed her eyes, the tears falling silently now. And for the first time in years, she believed she might not be lost anymore. The wind carried the scent of dry hay and morning dew. As Eliza stood before the patch of earth behind the barn, it was hard-packed, sun-scorched and cluttered with weeds. But to her it looked like promise. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, dirt already clinging to her fingers. This wasn't just about planting, it was about staying. Pick something that'll hold, Jackson had said, handing her the worn tools. Something you believe in. She thought of her mother, humming while tending the small garden back home, lavender blooming in soft rows, their scent lulling her to sleep as a child. I want lavender, Eliza told him. Jackson had only nodded. It was slow work. The soil was stubborn, and so were the weeds. But each morning, Eliza rose with the sun and bent her back to the land. She mixed ash with compost, hauled water from the well, and worked the seeds into the furrows with gentle hands. Molly helped where she could, scattering petals, asking questions, singing to the plants. Will they know we love them? She asked once. I think they already do, Eliza whispered, brushing a curl from Molly's cheek. The lavender came up cautious at first. Thin stalks, unsure, but they grew. At first, the townsfolk still kept their distance. Whispers followed her into the general store. Eyes turned when she passed. Some women crossed the street rather than greet her, but Eliza kept walking, not with her head high but steady. She brought her baskets of lavender to town, left small bundles on doorsteps, gave Molly the joy of delivering them like secrets wrapped in purple. From Miss E, Molly would say with a grin. One morning, Widow Thompson, the preacher's widow and fiercest tongue in Dry Creek, stepped out onto her porch, holding the lavender sprigs Eliza had left. Come by Thursday, she said gruffly. We need an extra hand for the church supper. Eliza blinked. Me? You cook, don't you? Eliza nodded slowly. Good. I hate baking. Then she went inside without another word. Thursday evening smelled of cornbread and apples. Eliza stood in the church kitchen, apron on, flowers smudged across her sleeve, her hands moving like they remembered. She laughed an unguarded surprise sound when Widow Thompson told her the biscuits were passable. That night, walking home under a sky of stars, Jackson watched her from a step behind, a strange tightness in his chest. She belonged to the dirt beneath her feet, and it was beginning to love her back. The harvest festival came with fiddles and lanterns, hay bales and cider, children running wild between booths. Music rose from the chapel yard, and the town gathered like a story waiting to be told. Eliza wore the blue dress Molly had once chosen. Her hair was pulled back, but a few strands escaped, softening her face. She stood near the edge of the gathering, unsure until Molly tugged her hand. We're up next. Next for what? I told Miss Lacey we'd sing. Remember the song you taught me? Eliza palled. I didn't mean for us to, but Molly was already pulling her toward the makeshift stage. The crowd hushed as they climbed the steps. Molly turned to the gathering, her voice clear and sure. This is my mama's favorite song. The words echoed in the stillness. Eliza felt every eye on her. Her chest ached, her hands trembled. Then Molly began to sing. It was an old hymn, barely remembered by most, but Eliza picked up the melody like it had never left her bones. She joined in, soft at first, then strong, and in the middle of that quiet golden dusk, her voice rose. She did not notice Jackson moving through the crowd, not until he was standing at the foot of the stage. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, but he climbed the steps, reached for her hand, and held it before the whole town. And in that single silent gesture, calloused fingers wrapped around hers. Eliza felt the earth beneath her shift. She was not just surviving, she was staying. The sun was barely over the ridge when the wagon rolled in. A fine polished carriage drawn by two bay horses with silver-stamped bridles. Dust curled behind its wheels like a veil. Jackson stood near the corral, hands on his hips, squinting toward the visitor. A woman stepped down, her gloved hand extended before her boot touched the ground. She wore a pale cream dress, city silk, not prairie cotton, and a hat with a feather that dipped just so over her brow. She looked out of place and perfectly composed. "Jackson," she called, her voice smooth and familiar. "It has been far too long." His face hardened a fraction. CL, Clara Wynne, once his fiancée, long before Molly, long before grief, now widowed. And back Clara stayed for dinner. How could they do the job for us? Eliza served stew in silence, watching from the doorway as Clara charmed her way into the seat beside Jackson. Her voice lilted like honey over wildflowers, all grace and poise. She laughed at his quiet remarks, brushing her fingers along her sleeve just so. Molly sat wide-eyed, hanging on to every word as Clara told stories of grand cities and distant lands. "I brought you something," Clara said, opening a velvet pouch. "Salted caramel from New Orleans." Molly gasped with delight. Eliza turned back to the kitchen before anyone saw her face. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but full of shifting ground. Clara offered to invest in a new breeding program for thoroughbreds. Something had once dreamed of doing with his late wife. The ranch would expand. Reputation would grow. "We could build something lasting," Clara said over coffee one morning. "Something respectable." Her eyes drifted just for a moment to the corner where Eliza knelt over the hearth, scrubbing. Jackson didn't reply. Eliza tried to ignore the change, but it seeped into the way Jackson walked, the way he spoke less at supper. He wasn't cold, just uncertain. Molly, too, had grown quiet. One evening, as Eliza tucked her in, Molly asked softly, "If Miss Clara becomes Mama too, do I still call you Mama Liza?" The question struck deeper than it should have. Eliza kissed her forehead and whispered, "You can call me whatever you want, sweetheart." But she did not sleep that night. The next afternoon, Eliza found Clara in the garden. "You wanted something?" Clara asked, standing from the lavender row. "I wanted to thank you," Eliza said, holding her hands behind her back. Clara arched an eyebrow. "For what?" "For reminding me that I will never be enough for this world." Clara's smile was thin. "I did not say that. You didn't have to." They stood in silence, wind rustling the herbs between them. "I know what I look like to people like you," Eliza said. "A girl with a past and no pedigree, but I've earned every breath I take. Can you say the same?" Clara's face didn't move, but her eyes hardened. "Eliza," she said quietly, "you can win over the ranch, maybe even the child, but society remembers. It always does." Eliza nodded once and walked away. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Eliza stood on the porch with her bag packed. She hadn't told Jackson, hadn't told Molly. She couldn't compete with a memory dressed in silk. Jackson found her there, arms folded, face unreadable. "You're leaving?" he asked. Eliza didn't look at him. "I will never be her, and maybe that's why I should go." He said nothing. She waited, but silence was a language too. She stepped down the stairs, heart heavy. Molly skipped dinner. When Jackson checked her room, she was gone. Panic gripped his chest, but before he could shout, he saw the barn door cracked open. Inside, Molly sat on a hay bale beside Eliza, a folded paper in her lap. "I made you something," the girl said, holding it out. Eliza unfolded it, a crayon drawing, crude but full of heart. 3 figures stood in a field of purple. A little girl, a tall man with a hat, and a woman in blue. They were smiling, holding hands. Above them in shaky letters, "My family." "I want you to stay," Molly whispered. Eliza looked up. Her throat tightened. Jackson stood in the doorway, watching. Eliza met his eyes. And this time, she didn't look away. Eliza folded the last of her clothes into the canvas bag without sound. She wasn't angry anymore, only tired. Tired of choosing silence over pride. Tired of being the reason someone else had to decide between comfort and courage. She didn't belong in Jackson's world, not when the past kept knocking with silk gloves and sweet smiles. She glanced once more at the corner of the room, the cot where Molly had once curled up with a book in her lap, the little vase where wildflowers used to sit. Eliza placed the bag by the door. Then a cry split the silence. "Miss Eliza." It was Molly. The voice was raw, panicked. Then came a sound no mother or woman who'd become one without meaning to could ignore. A fevered wail. They found her shivering under the blanket, skin slick with sweat, cheeks burning with heat. "Help me," Jackson said, lifting Molly gently. "Please." Eliza didn't hesitate. She boiled willow bark and elderflower, crushed peppermint leaves, and laid cool rags across the child's head. She sang songs from her own childhood, verses about rain and rest and home. Her voice cracked, but she kept singing. 3 nights passed. Elisa never left Molly's side. She sponged her brow, whispered comfort through the trembling, and held her through each hallucinated cry. On the 4th night, Jackson stirred from his bed and walked down the hall. The door was ajar. He paused. Inside, Eliza sat in the rocking chair, slumped forward, asleep with Molly's tiny hand still in hers. Her dress was wrinkled, hair undone, eyes ringed with exhaustion, but her face, even in weariness, looked like peace. Jackson stepped back slowly. He returned to his desk, sat down and reached for pen and paper. His hand trembled as he wrote, "Eliza, it was never Clara. It's always been the woman who came in chains and brought us back to life. Jay!" He didn't sign his full name. He didn't need to. He folded the letter and placed it beneath the inkwell on the corner of his desk. Then he sat back and closed his eyes. By morning, Molly's fever had broken. She blinked up at Eliza with glassy but clearer eyes. "You stayed," she murmured. Eliza kissed her forehead always. That afternoon, Clara packed her bags. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. As she climbed into her carriage, she turned to Jackson. "She loves you more than I ever could. That scares you, doesn't it?" Jackson didn't answer. She nodded once. "I hope you earn it." Then she was gone. The lavender fields were almost in bloom again. Eliza stood at the edge of them, arms wrapped around herself as the wind moved the green stalks in waves. She didn't hear Jackson approach until he was beside her. He held something in his hand. Molly's crayon drawing now worn at the edges. They didn't speak for a while. Then he said softly, "I built this ranch for survival, but I built this life for you." Eliza turned to him, eyes shining with everything she couldn't say aloud, and for once there were no chains between them. Not of iron, not of doubt, only choice, only love. Snow had not yet touched the Arizona ground, but winter made its presence known in other ways. Frost on the barn roof at dawn, the way the wind curled cold beneath coats, the silence of trees stripped bare. Inside the house it was warm. The hearth crackled, and the scent of cinnamon and cedar filled the air. For the first time, the ranch felt less like a place for surviving and more like a home. Their home Molly had taken to writing. She sat by the window most mornings, tongue between her teeth, as she scribbled in a small, leather-bound journal Eliza had given her. The first line read, "I have 2 parents now." She read it aloud one morning, then looked up at Eliza with the confidence only a child can wear. "That's what you are, right?" Eliza smiled gently. "That's what I hope to be." Molly grinned. "You already are." Preparations for Dry Creek's first ever Christmas market were underway. It had been Widow Thompson's idea, but it was Eliza who had breathed life into it. She organized the women, gathered pine cones and candles, baked biscuits until her hands were sore. She stitched ribbons into lavender bundles and carved soap into little stars. "Used to be no one had take her hand in church," Widow Thompson muttered to Jackson one evening. "Now half the town's taken her advice." Jackson only nodded, eyes following Eliza across the square as she handed Molly a basket of sweets to pass out. She moved like she belonged because now she did. One crisp afternoon, Jackson took her out to the back pasture. He handed her a rifle. Eliza blinked. I thought you didn't want me holding one. I didn't. He said back then you were still running, and now he met her eyes. Now I want you to stop being afraid. She exhaled slowly, wrapping her hands around the stock. Her stance was unsure. Her heart pounded. Line up the sights, Jackson said gently. Breathe steady. Don't fight it. Trust it. She fired. The shot rang out sharp and clean. The tin can atop the post tumbled. Eliza stared, stunned. Then she laughed loud and clear and free. Jackson smiled, holstering his own rifle. You're part of this land now. Time you felt like it. You. Christmas Eve arrived in a hush of pale light. They ate together at the long table. Eliza, Jackson, Molly. No guests, no grand declarations, just warmth and food and the quiet comfort of belonging. After the plates were cleared, Molly ran off and returned with a small box wrapped in a red scarf. He handed it to Eliza, practically vibrating with excitement. Eliza opened it slowly. Inside was the silver necklace she'd thought long lost, the one from her father's cedar box. But now hanging beside the silver tag was a small heart-shaped charm carved from wood. On it, carefully etched by clumsy child hands, was a single word. Eliza's breath caught her fingers closed around the necklace, and then around Molly, pulling her close. Thank you, she whispered. Molly beamed. You're my real mama now, not just in my head. Eliza looked up and found Jackson watching her. They said nothing. He didn't reach across the table. She didn't rise from her chair. But in that silence, something passed between them, stronger than a vow, older than fear. It was in the way his eyes softened, in the way she didn't look away. A family made not by blood, but by choice, by love, and by every moment that had led them here. She came in chains, but stayed as a mother, a partner, and the heart of a home. In a land where love was a risk few dared take, Eliza chose to stay, and Jackson chose her right back. If this story touched your heart, tap, like, and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more unforgettable tales of love, loss, and redemption under the open sky. Hit the bell so you never miss a story where bullets missed but hearts didn't.